This is my true story. I raised my son with my own two hands, fed him when I was hungry, and gave him every chance at life. But as I grew older, he turned cruel. One weekend, he locked me inside his garage for 2 days, with no food, no water, and no light. He even recorded me, mocking me with his friends like I was an animal in a cage. I stayed quiet when I was released, but I didn't stay weak. You won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. I was not born into comfort. My hands grew old before their time because of the work I chose to do for my family. Day after day, I woke up before the sun and worked long shifts in factories, warehouses, and construction sites. My back bent under heavy loads, my palms blistered from steel tools, and my lungs carried the dust of decades. But I never complained, because everything I earned went into building a future for my son. I believed that sacrifice was love. I believed that by giving him more than I ever had, I was guaranteeing myself not only his success, but also his respect. When he was a boy, I put shoes on his feet when mine had holes. I sent him to school with a lunchbox full of food, even if it meant I drank water and called it dinner. He never went hungry, never went cold, never felt the shame I had felt as a poor child. I promised myself he would never know what it meant to stand in front of a shop window and dream of something he could not have. So I worked extra shifts. I gave up nights of sleep. I took second jobs cleaning and hauling just so he could have his first bicycle, his first nice jacket, his first real taste of dignity. When he reached college age, I did not hesitate. I signed loans, emptied savings, and took on side work so he could go to a university and have what I never had. I watched him walk across that campus in new clothes, carrying books I had paid for, and I felt proud. I thought, this is the moment every sacrifice becomes worth it. And when he graduated, I thought the respect would come naturally. The quiet nod, the recognition that his father had carried him every step of the way to that stage. But respect never came. Gratitude never appeared. He spoke about his achievements as though he had done it all alone. He never mentioned the hands that built the foundation under his feet. I brushed it off, thinking, he is young. He will grow older, and with age, he will understand. I even bought his first car. I remember the day I handed him the keys, the smile on his face, the freedom in his eyes. I wanted him to feel like he could go anywhere, do anything. Later, when he married, I helped with the down payment for his home. When he got his first job, I made a few calls to people I had once worked beside, old contacts from my decades of labor. Those conversations opened the door for him, the same door he later bragged about walking through alone. Through all of this, I believed the same thing. A son never forgets his father's hands. A son never spits on the shoulders that carried him. But I was wrong. As the years went by, my role in his life became smaller and smaller. From provider, I became background. From background, I became invisible. He did not see the man who bled for his future. He only saw an old man taking up space in his house. Still, I did not let bitterness take root. I told myself love was patient. I told myself maybe he was just busy. Maybe one day he would sit with me, share a cup of tea, and say the words every father waits to hear. Thank you. But that day never came. Instead, my sacrifices became ammunition for his arrogance. He used my age, my weakness, and my dependence as tools to humiliate me. And the most painful part of it all was that I never expected such cruelty from the very child I had built my life around. I gave everything to raise him, and in return, he gave me shame. The first cracks didn't come with a slap, a shout, or even the garage. They came slowly, like small cuts that at first sting but don't bleed much, until one day, the wounds cover the whole body. I noticed the change when my son stopped calling me Dad and started calling me the old man. It was small at first, a slip of the tongue. He'd laugh with his friends and say, "The old man is slow today," or "The old man can't hear well." Everyone chuckled, including him, and I forced myself to laugh along, pretending it didn't hurt. But inside, I felt the sting. A father is not supposed to be reduced to a joke. At family dinners, I'd try to share stories from my youth. I thought maybe my experiences, the way I worked, the mistakes I made, the lessons I learned, would teach my son something or give him perspective. But instead of listening, he rolled his eyes. Sometimes he cut me off mid-sentence and said, "Nobody wants to hear that. Times are different now." His wife would smirk into her plate, and his children picked up the habit, giggling whenever I spoke too long. I felt myself shrinking at that table piece by piece until my words had no weight. He also mocked my body. My hands had grown shaky with age, and sometimes I dropped a spoon or spilled a little water. Instead of helping, he pointed it out loudly. "Careful, old man. Don't make a mess." His friends laughed when he said it in front of them. One even asked, "Why do you keep him around?" And my son answered without hesitation, "Because he's too stubborn to go to a home." The laughter that followed cut deeper than any insult. They didn't see me as a man anymore, just an inconvenience. Even my slowness became a target. If we walked to the store together, he walked 10 steps ahead, turning back only to say, "Hurry up, you're holding me back." When I tried to help around the house, lifting something or fixing a small item, he waved me off, saying, "Don't touch it, you'll break it." It wasn't just disrespect, it was erasure. Every attempt I made to be useful was met with dismissal. Every moment I tried to belong was met with mockery. I told myself, this is just stress. He works long hours. He'll grow out of it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't stress. It was contempt. He looked at me and didn't see a father anymore. He saw weakness, and weakness, in his eyes, deserved ridicule. The worst part was how others joined in. His friends repeated his words, calling me fossil or grandpa relic. Sometimes when I walked into a room, the laughter stopped, not because they respected me, but because they had been laughing about me. Once, I overheard my son on the phone telling someone, "He's just dead weight now, but what can you do? He's family." Hearing that nearly broke me. Dead weight. After decades of carrying him, I was nothing but a burden. I stayed quiet through it all. I didn't want to fight my own child. I told myself love meant patience. Love meant forgiveness. I bit my tongue and swallowed the humiliation, thinking that maybe one day he would remember who I was. Not a joke, not dead weight, but the man who gave him everything. But I was wrong. The disrespect was not going to fade. It was going to grow. And eventually, it would trap me in a place darker than I ever imagined, his garage. It happened on a weekend. My son had invited his friends over, just like he often did. They filled the house with their loud laughter, their bottles of beer, and their careless words. I stayed in my room, out of the way, because that's what he always told me to do when people came over. He never said it kindly, always with that sharp tone. "Stay out of the way, old man. Don't embarrass me." So I obeyed, because fighting back only made him angrier. That afternoon, he called to me. "Dad, come here. I need your help with something in the garage." For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wanted me to show his friends I was useful. Maybe he was finally going to include me in something instead of hiding me. So I shuffled down the hall, step by slow step, my knees aching as they always did. When I entered the garage, it was dim. Tools on the wall, boxes stacked high, the smell of oil in the air. I turned to ask what he needed. Before I could speak, I heard the sharp click of the lock behind me. I spun around, confused, and saw him holding the door shut with a grin on his face. Behind him, through the small gap, I heard laughter erupt from his friends in the kitchen. My stomach sank. This wasn't help. This was something else. I tried the handle. Locked. I banged on the door, calling his name. His voice came muffled through the wood. "Stay in there, old man. Don't come out until I say so." More laughter followed. They thought it was a game, but it wasn't a game to me. It was a cage. The hours stretched. At first I thought he would let me out after a while, when the joke got old. But the hours turned into a whole night. There was no light except what came from the small high window. No food, no water. Just me, sitting on the cold floor with my back against a box, listening to the sound of their laughter through the thin walls. Sometimes they came to the window, pointing their phones inside, recording me. They shouted insults, calling me fossil, prisoner, the useless one. They laughed as they filmed me struggling to stand, filmed me knocking weakly on the door, filmed me sitting with my head in my hands. 2 days, 48 hours, that's how long they left me there. My body grew weak, my lips cracked with thirst, my stomach twisted with hunger. The shame was worse than the hunger. Knowing that the boy I raised, the boy I carried on my shoulders, the boy I fed and clothed, was standing outside with his friends making me into entertainment. He wasn't ashamed. He was proud of it. He recorded it. He showed it off. When the door finally opened, I didn't rush out. I couldn't. My legs shook under me. He stood there with a smirk, his friends behind him still chuckling. "You're free now," he said, like it was a gift. Not one of them helped me stand. Not one of them apologized. I walked out on my own, each step heavy, not because of weakness, but because my heart felt like stone. In that moment, something in me broke. I wasn't just humiliated. I wasn't just disrespected. I was dehumanized, treated like an animal, locked up, mocked, recorded for their fun. That was the moment I knew love no longer lived in my son. Whatever bond we had as father and child was gone, replaced by cruelty, by arrogance, by shame. And I knew, as sure as the air I breathed, that I could not let this pass. The first hour in that garage was confusion. I thought maybe he was drunk. Maybe it was a cruel joke that would end quickly. I knocked gently on the door and called his name. No answer. Only laughter drifting in from the kitchen. I sat back down on the concrete, telling myself, he'll come soon. He won't really leave me here. But the minutes became hours, and the hours grew long and cold. By nightfall, the air inside the garage grew heavy and damp. I had no food, no water, no blanket. I tried to find a comfortable place on the hard floor, but my back screamed with pain. Every time I shifted, the sound of my joints echoed in that empty space, reminding me how fragile I had become. I wrapped my arms around myself and closed my eyes, praying for sleep to come. But even in the silence, I could hear them, bursts of laughter from the house, the muffled thud of music, my son's voice loudest of all. Sometime in the night, the door rattled. For a moment, hope shot through me. I stood quickly, my legs trembling, thinking he had come to let me out. Instead, a shadow appeared at the small high window. My son's face, lit by the glow of his phone screen. He lifted it up, recording. "Smile for the camera, old man," he sneered. His friends' laughter rang out behind him. One of them shouted, "Dance for us!" They found my suffering amusing. They found my weakness entertaining. I tried to cover my face, but the light from his phone caught me in the worst state, hunched, broken, helpless. He laughed even harder. Then the door stayed shut. Hours passed again. I lay down, too tired to sit up, too hungry to think straight. The concrete floor stole the warmth from my bones. My mouth grew so dry that even swallowing hurt. By the next morning, I was weak. I tried knocking on the door, but my hand shook too much. The sound was pathetic, like a faint tap instead of a demand. I heard them walking past outside, heard his friends mocking me. Still alive in there? Better check on the fossil. And then, the worst, more recording. They shoved their phones through the window crack and filmed me sitting on the floor with my head between my knees. They jeered, "Look at him, useless. Can't even stand." Each word was a knife. 48 hours, 2 days of darkness, cold, and hunger. 2 days of hearing my son laugh at me. 2 days of humiliation piling higher and higher until it was no longer just an insult. It was a destruction of dignity. I thought of the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, The child I once fed with the last piece of bread while I went hungry. The young man I supported through school and life. And now here he was, treating me like an object of ridicule, locking me away like trash. When the door finally opened, light spilled into the garage, blinding my weak eyes. My son stood there, grinning, holding his phone. "You survived," he said, as if it were a joke. His friends chuckled behind him. None of them offered a hand. None of them said sorry. I had to push myself up, my legs trembling, and walk out past them with what little strength I had left. I didn't say a word. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply walked back to my room, shut the door, and sat down. Inside, though, my heart was no longer patient. It was no longer forgiving. It was stone. Those 2 days stripped away not only my dignity, but also the last thread of hope that my son would ever see me as a father again. What he had done wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't thoughtless. It was deliberate. He wanted me humiliated, and he succeeded. But in that success, he planted something else inside me, resolve. If he thought those 2 days broke me, he was wrong. They forged me into something sharper, colder. I had been patient all my life. I had forgiven too much. Now, it was time for me to answer humiliation with justice. When I finally returned to my room after those 2 days, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. My body was exhausted, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I replayed every moment in that garage, the sound of the lock clicking, the laughter of his friends, the cold concrete under my back, the taste of thirst that burned my throat. Most of all, I replayed his face at the door, holding his phone, grinning while I suffered. That image burned into me. It was not the face of a son. It was the face of a man who no longer respected me, no longer saw me as human. I stayed quiet for the rest of that evening. My son went on as if nothing had happened. I heard him joking with his friends, ordering food, playing music. They laughed in the living room while I sat in silence. But inside, I was no longer broken. I was planning. I knew now there was no repairing what had been destroyed. He had crossed a line no father should ever see his child cross. There would be no apology, no reflection, no change. There would only be more cruelty, unless I stopped it. As I sat there, I thought of all the years I had given him, the long shifts at the factory, the pain in my back, the nights I worked overtime so he could have shoes, books, and toys, the money I saved to send him to college, the car I helped him buy, the job connection I gave him through an old friend. Everything he had was built on my sacrifice. And yet, with all that behind us, he decided I was nothing but a joke. He stripped me of dignity. And for what? To look funny in front of his friends, to get cheap laughs at my expense. But then I realized something. He had recorded everything. He thought those recordings were trophies. He thought they were proof of his power, proof of his dominance over me. But to me, they were something else. Evidence. He didn't even know that he had handed me the very weapon I would use against him. I remembered how careless he was with his laptop, always leaving it open on the table. I remembered how he synced his phone automatically to the cloud, storing all his videos and photos in one place. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that somewhere in those files were the recordings of me locked in that garage, begging for water, crawling on the floor. Proof of his cruelty, proof of his shame. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I simply waited. My anger was no longer wild. It was cold, controlled. I was no longer the weak old man he had trapped in that garage. I was his father, the man who built his life, the man who still held the power to take it all away. He thought I was helpless. He forgot the truth. In the silence of that night, I made my decision. I would not scream at him. I would not fight him. I would not even confront him face to face. That would give him more satisfaction, more fuel for mockery. Instead, I would strike quietly, with precision, in a way he would never expect. I would use his own arrogance against him. The same recordings he made to laugh at me would become the blade that cut down his pride, his reputation, his career. As I drifted into a restless sleep, one thought stayed in my mind like a whisper. He thinks I am weak. Tomorrow, he will learn how strong silence can be. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen as if nothing had happened. My son sat at the table scrolling through his phone, half asleep, drinking coffee. He barely looked at me. He didn't see the anger in my eyes. He didn't notice the way I clenched my jaw. To him, I was still the weak old man from the garage, the one he could mock and trap and laugh at. That blindness was my advantage. I remembered the laptop he left open on the counter most nights. It was synced to his phone. Every video, every photo, every message, they all flowed into that machine. He never thought I knew. He never imagined I paid attention to those small details. But I had. Age slows the body, but it sharpens the eyes when the heart is forced to endure humiliation. Later that afternoon, when he left for work, I moved quietly. My hand shook as I sat down at his laptop, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I opened the files. It was all there. Dozens of videos, clips of me in the garage, banging weakly on the door, calling his name, footage of me crawling on the cold floor, clutching my knees, struggling to move, his voice in the background, laughing, calling me names. Old fossil, useless. Look at him. His friends jeering, recording their own copies, shouting insults that burned in my ears again as I watched. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to keep watching. Each video was another wound, but each wound hardened me further. This was proof. This was not just a memory of cruelty. This was evidence no one could deny. He had filmed his own disgrace and saved it like treasure. I plugged in a small USB drive I had kept in my drawer for years. Slowly, carefully, I copied every file. It took time. The progress bar moved like a slow march, each percentage pulling me deeper into resolve. When the last file transferred, I held the USB in my palm like a weapon, small, simple, but deadly to the life he thought he had secured. I put everything back exactly as it was, closed the laptop, wiped the surface clean so he would never suspect I touched it. When he came home later that evening, he didn't notice a thing. He smiled at his phone, probably rewatching the same videos he thought gave him power. But he didn't know those files no longer belonged only to him. They belonged to me now. I sat across the table from him in silence. He laughed to himself, scrolling, shaking his head, muttering, "Too funny." And all I could think was, "Keep laughing, son. Tomorrow, that laughter will cost you everything." That night, as I held the USB close, I realized something. The humiliation he thought would break me had instead armed me. His arrogance, his cruelty, his mockery. He had recorded it all. He handed me the evidence with his own hands, blind to the storm it would bring. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to beg. All I needed to do was show the world who he really was. And with that, I knew exactly what my next step would be. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, and the house was silent. My son was still asleep, snoring in his room, unaware that his world was about to crack open. I sat at my desk with the small USB drive in front of me. It looked so ordinary, yet I knew the weight it carried. Inside it were the moments he thought were jokes, the moments he believed proved his strength. But they were actually the rope he had tied around his own neck. All I had to do was pull. I turned on my old laptop. The screen flickered to life slowly, as if even the machine understood the gravity of the moment. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling not from fear, but from the heaviness of what I was about to do. For years, I had avoided conflict. I had swallowed insults, endured humiliation, chosen silence over retaliation. But not today. Today, silence would not protect him. It would destroy him. I thought about his job. He worked for a company that valued professionalism, image, and public respect. I remembered how he bragged about his boss, a man who demanded integrity and hated scandal. My son wore that job like a crown, holding it up as proof of his success, proof that he was better than me, stronger than me. He had no idea that the very thing he valued most was the thing I was about to take from him. I opened a new email. My hands moved slowly at first, but as the words came, they poured out with clarity. I didn't rant. I didn't insult. I didn't explain my pain or write long stories about what he did. I kept it simple because the truth spoke louder than anything I could add. I typed, "To whom it may concern, this is how your employee treats his own father." I attached the videos, every single one. Him locking me in the garage, him laughing while I crawled on the floor, his friends mocking me through the window, his voice calling me useless, his face grinning into the camera like cruelty was a sport. Before I pressed send, I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. I thought of the boy I once carried on my shoulders. I thought of the man who now looked at me as nothing. I thought of the 2 days I spent trapped in darkness, begging for water while he laughed. And I knew this email wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was the only way to balance what he had done. My finger pressed the mouse. Send. The email disappeared into the digital world. For a moment, I just stared at the empty screen. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with release. It was done. There was no taking it back. I closed the laptop, slid the USB back into my pocket, and sat quietly as the sun rose higher. My son stirred in his room, still snoring, still dreaming of a life he thought he controlled. He didn't know that by the end of the week, everything he boasted about would crumble. He didn't know that the crown he wore so proudly would be ripped from his head by his own actions. As I sat there, I whispered to myself, "You recorded my humiliation to laugh at me. Now the world will see, and it will laugh at you." And with that, I waited, calm, patient, ready for the storm to come. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours, the walls of his world began to fall. At first, I could tell something was wrong by the way he stormed through the house, slamming doors, shouting at his phone. He didn't say much to me, but I saw the panic on his face. His usual cocky grin was gone. His hands shook when he lit his cigarette on the porch. He barked at his wife on the phone, his voice cracking as if the ground beneath him was breaking apart. I stayed silent, sitting in my chair, pretending to read the newspaper, but inside I knew exactly what was happening. By the 3rd day, the truth spilled out. He came home early, face pale, shirt wrinkled, tie hanging loose like a noose around his neck. He dropped his bag on the floor and sank into a chair, muttering, "They called me into HR." His wife asked what happened, but he snapped at her to shut up. He didn't notice me in the corner, watching quietly. My heart was steady. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just listened. He ranted about the videos. Somebody sent them to my boss. They had everything: the garage, the recordings, the jokes. His voice rose in anger and desperation. They said it was misconduct, that it brought shame on the company. They told me I embarrassed them. They fired me on the spot. His wife gasped. His children peeked from the hallway, confused. But I just sat still, letting his words hang heavy in the air. For years, he had mocked me, treated me like a burden, locked me away as if I were trash. Now, the very cruelty he used to climb higher had dragged him down into the dirt. Word spread fast. His colleagues distanced themselves immediately. The same friends who once laughed with him at my expense stopped answering his calls. One by one, the connections he bragged about vanished. His reputation was ruined. People in town whispered behind his back. They had seen the videos too. His laughter in those recordings now echoed as his downfall. He tried to confront me once, stood in front of me, red-faced, screaming, "Was it you? Did you do this to me?" I didn't answer. I looked him in the eyes, calm as stone, and then turned my head away. That silence broke him more than words ever could. For the first time, he understood that he wasn't in control. Days turned into weeks, and his arrogance collapsed into desperation. Without his job, bills piled up. His wife grew distant, her voice sharp with blame. His children whispered in confusion about why Daddy was always angry. He walked the house like a ghost, snapping at everyone, searching for someone else to blame. But deep down, I knew he recognized the truth. He had destroyed himself, and I had simply let the world see it. And I never raised my voice once. After he lost his job, the house filled with tension so heavy it could be cut with a knife. He tried everything to claw back the control he thought he had. He shouted at me, he begged me, he even cried once in the kitchen when he thought no one was watching. But I saw him. I saw the way his shoulders shook, the way his hands gripped the counter until his knuckles went white. That proud son of mine, who once laughed as I crawled on the garage floor, now stood broken by the silence I gave him. He confronted me every few days. He stormed into my room, waving his arms, demanding answers. "Why won't you say anything? Why won't you tell me it wasn't you? Why won't you explain?" His face was red, his words sharp, but I never moved. I never lifted my voice. I never admitted or denied. I simply looked at him, steady, unflinching, until his own rage burned itself out. Then I would turn back to whatever I was doing, reading, writing, or just staring at the window, as if his noise meant nothing. That silence was my weapon, and it pierced him deeper than any word could. The more I stayed quiet, the more desperate he became. He tried to laugh it off, forcing jokes at the dinner table, but no one laughed with him anymore. His wife rolled her eyes, his children looked at him with confusion, and I sat still, calm, unmoved. He started following me around the house, begging, "Dad, just talk to me, tell me what to do, help me fix this." But I said nothing. I had already given him every chance in life, schooling, a home, a future. He had thrown it all away when he locked me in the dark and turned my suffering into a joke. At night, I could hear him pacing the halls, his footsteps restless, his voice whispering curses under his breath. Sometimes he cried quietly, thinking no one heard. Sometimes he punched the wall in anger, blaming everyone but himself. But no matter how loud he became, I stayed silent. That silence was the wall he could never climb. Neighbors began to notice. They saw him at home during the day when he should have been at work. They saw him borrowing money, making excuses, growing more bitter by the week. Whispers spread, and soon, even outside our home, he could feel the weight of shame pressing on him. And still, I said nothing. My silence told him everything. I was done. Done being mocked, done being humiliated, done being his victim. He wanted answers, but I gave him none. He wanted forgiveness, but I offered none. He wanted me to acknowledge him, but I denied him even that. And in that silence, he finally felt what I had felt for years: powerless, invisible, discarded. And so I sat, calm as ever, while he crumbled piece by piece. When the dust finally settled, I left, not with noise, not with anger, not with arguments, only with quiet steps and a single suitcase. I took my savings, the little I had kept separate, and I moved to a small town where no one knew me as the old man locked in the garage. For the first time in years, I woke up without tension pressing on my chest. The air felt lighter. The mornings were calm. I made my own breakfast, walked at my own pace, and every simple act of independence felt like a victory. I rented a small cottage near the edge of town. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. No one slammed doors at me. No one raised their voice. No one treated me like dead weight. Here, my silence wasn't a punishment. It was peace. I spent my mornings walking slowly down quiet streets, my cane tapping the ground in rhythm with my steps. No one told me to hurry. No one mocked me for moving too slow. People greeted me with nods, sometimes smiles, and kept walking. No judgment, no cruelty, just simple respect. In the afternoons, I sat by the window and read books I hadn't touched in years. The sun would warm my hands, and I would think about how far I had come. Sometimes I laughed quietly to myself, not out of bitterness, but out of relief. My son thought he could lock me in darkness and laugh at my suffering, but now he was the one locked in silence, locked out of my life, locked out of the respect he once thought was his right. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need revenge that spilled blood. My justice had been clean, final, undeniable. I sent small donations to local charities. I wrote letters to old friends. I even helped a neighbor fix his garden fence, slowly but surely, enjoying the work. People began to know me not as a burden, but as a man of quiet strength. That was all I ever wanted. Dignity. And I had it now, far from the house where I had been humiliated. Sometimes I would sit outside at night and look at the stars. I thought of the boy I once raised, the son I once carried on my shoulders, the man he chose to become. There was sadness, yes, but not regret. I had done what I needed to do. I had shown him that cruelty has a cost, and arrogance has an end. He still calls sometimes. I see his number light up the phone, but I never answer. I let it ring until the sound dies out, just like his pride, just like his laughter. My silence remains the loudest voice he will ever hear from me, and in that silence, I finally live free. My final thought. He locked me in the dark for 2 days. With one video, I locked him out of his future and walked into peace.